Hello, my name is Cissy Crusoe and I'm from Idabel, Oklahoma, and I'm making this video for Angie Cartwright, the founder of Grief The Unspoken. She has asked us in her support group for us to make videos for the Grievance Awareness Day that's going to be held this year, where she wanted us to tell her story. So I'm going to tell you mine. I have 3 losses that I have been coping and dealing with going back to 2007. My oldest brother Kirk, who died at the age of 45 to a heart disease called myocarditis. And this is something that is genetic, that runs in our family. And if you don't take care of your heart, your hypertension and so forth, I mean, it can be a deadly illness. It can cause your heart to go into cardiac arrest. And then there's my father, who died of a heart disease, who fell over dead with a heart attack. And then there's my mother, who I lost recently, well, a year ago, January 27th, 2013, to carcinoid cancer of the liver. Each of these losses felt like a tidal wave. I felt like I was on an island and there was one coconut tree. And each death represented a huge tidal wave that just went over the entire island, trying to suck me in to its current. And I was just hanging on to that tree with everything that I had. And then when it was calm, silence. That's when it hit me. Grief. I went through a bad experience with my brother Kirk, which inflicted anger on top of grief, and that was the bad experience that I had with our local hospital, the ER doctor, and the CEO. My brother was misdiagnosed going back to June of 2007. And on October 28, 2007, when they finally admitted my brother, the ER doctor finally said, well, he's really sick. And it's like, no, duh, you know. Yeah, he's sick. He's been sick since June, and you've been saying it's bronchitis and pneumonia, and here he is coughing up blood. You know, there's something wrong with my brother, and you need to fix it. My mom, my dad felt the same way as I did. And when they finally admitted my brother, treating him for pneumonia, he had a massive heart attack 2 hours after he was admitted in the hospital. And they still didn't know what happened. He had a blood clot as big as a man's fist, on what the local cardiologist reported when he had a heart attack. I mean, I am grateful to this man, because if my brother wasn't in his hands, but this ER doctor, who I do not respect whatsoever, I mean, he's a gynecologist, trying to be a trauma doctor. But anyway, he misdiagnosed my brother. And it was the cardiologist who hooked my brother up to a life support machine to keep him alive. And he said that he had blood clots in his heart, but he couldn't give us a diagnosis what happened. He couldn't explain to my mother, my father, and I what caused this incident to happen, because he says, I don't know. I was just up here when it happened, and I just did what I was trained to do. And I'm not really for sure what it is that's wrong with him, other than his organs are shutting down, and scientifically, he has less than 2 hours to live. according to what he was looking at. Well, I mean, how do you take that? I looked at my mom and my dad, and here we were looking at Kirk, and he was hooked up to all these machines, and my mother was praying. My dad, it was like he didn't know what to do. He was in shock. I talked to my brother. I told him that he can't die, that we needed him, and to come back to us. And I looked at that doctor and I said, you know what, my brother's not going to die in 2 hours or less. I said, he's going to live. And I said, do you believe in miracles? Do you believe in the power of prayer? And he says, well, according to all his vitals, they're not looking good, and I don't want to give you false hope. So to make a long story short, had a ministerial alliances to come in, and it was the Presbyterians, the Church of Christ, the Baptists, the Assembly of God, and the Methodists, the ministers. And they locked hands and they did the Lord's Prayer, the prayer that comes from the Bible. And they prayed hard over my brother using that prayer. And they did individual prayers. And then when that 2-hour mark rolled around, guess what happened? He didn't die. He opened up his eyes and he was beginning to pull all these wires off of him. And I just smiled really big and I went, God is good. God is good. But he wasn't out of the woods yet. But we were able to get him stabilized, to get him to the Oklahoma Heart Hospital in Oklahoma City, and that's where my brother was properly diagnosed with myocarditis. And that was also when we were told that if we caught it back in June when he first got sick, he would be a long-term survivor, because you can cure and treat myocarditis. You can live a long time with myocarditis if it's caught in time. But in my brother's case, it didn't happen. He lost 90% heart capacity and he needed a heart transplant. And because he didn't have a pay source because of a pre-existing illness that runs in our family, he just didn't get treated. So on November 27, 2007, my brother died. I watched my brother die. And that was hard. Because I saw what it did to my mom and dad. And my mother's voice. It's not natural for a parent to bury their child. It's supposed to be a child to bury their parents. My mother was comparing Kirk's loss to the loss of her parents, and so was my dad, and my dad even lost his brother. So my dad not only buried his parents and his brother, now he was burying his child, his firstborn. My mom just buried her parents. And they both said this is the worst experience. It was 2010. We were starting to pick up the broken pieces. I was angry. My grief went to anger, and my anger was not towards God, because God blessed me with miracles regarding my brother. And even though the outcome wasn't what I was hoping for, at least I know where he is. He's in heaven. And I know that for a fact, that my brother's in heaven. My anger was towards that hospital, towards the CEO, and towards that ER doctor, to where I wanted them fired. But one person can't do it. It's going to take a whole county to get rid of somebody that big and powerful. So I shared my brother's story with a lot of people, and it turned out that a lot of people were going through the same experiences. So every time the hospital asked for a tax, it never got passed. People said as long as that man is the CEO of the hospital tax will never be passed. Because he's a tyrant. He's a bully. He's arrogant. He has no care whatsoever about people's loved ones when they're getting cared for. And the kind of care that was taking place in ER, that should be unspoken all by itself. But there were a lot of people who has lost a family member, who is going through the same emotions that I was dealing with. Anger. Because there was no compassion. And my mom and dad was also in this big group who felt the same way. But we had to carry on. We had to move on. And then in 2010, my dad was showing the same symptoms that my brother was showing when he was going into congestional heart failure. All the signs were there. He would stumble. He complained of shortness of breath. He had edema, discomfort. He was showing a little forgetfulness. And my dad, he went to the doctor. And the doctor told him, it's his heart. It was his heart. And he would go to Oklahoma City to the Oklahoma Heart Hospital, see the cardiologist, and they would run tests, say, Wayne, your heart capacity, is at 30%. But you still got time. The grief, the agony that my dad was feeling towards losing his son, I think it affected him physically. But with us living in a very rural area in Oklahoma, where all we do have is our county hospital, when my dad passed out, I was thinking heart. My mom was thinking heart. And when the ambulance took him to the hospital, to the ER, that same ER doctor, why he is a doctor, I don't know. He needs to go. But anyway, he didn't treat my dad for congestional heart failure. He was putting in fluids. And he would stay there for about 4 hours and then send him home when all his vitals were looking, better. Instead of admitting him to where his primary doctor can, take over. But he didn't do that. He sent my dad home. Says that his sugar level was too low. And I looked at Mom and says, is Dad going into diabetes now? And she says, I don't know. Well, when 2011 rolled around, Dad went back to the ER. They sent him back home. When he had another sinking spell, we took him back out to the ER. They sent him back home. It was just like Kirk all over again. And my grief that went back to June 2007, it was getting to where it was not only anger, I was dealing with agony. because I felt like the same thing that happened to my brother was happening to my dad now. He was being misdiagnosed. And I told Dad, I said, if this happens again, Dad, you're going to be admitted, we're going to get you stabilized, and we're going to get you to Oklahoma City, one way or the other. Because I cannot lose you too, not right after we lost my brother. I just can't do it. And my mother was on my side. She felt the same way as I did. And what was so weird was that something was going on with my mom too. And when I talked to our primary family doctor about both of my parents, he said that my dad, he was dying. That his heart was nearly gone, and to brace myself. And I said, well, why is it that when my dad had these sinking spells and we take him to the ER, they pump him up with all this glucose and then they send him home? And he would scratch his head and he says, we have a serious problem with our ER staff. And we also have a serious problem with the administrator. But there's not anything that I could do about it or anyone else until the board decides to take action. It was up to the board to make things change regarding our local hospital. Well, August rolled around. August 2011. 2 weeks before my birthday, my daddy dies. I watched him fall over dead with a heart attack, exactly the way my family doctor described to me. And it shocked me to realize we didn't have a medical examiner. So my anger was not only towards that hospital, it was also towards the fact that we don't even have a medical examiner. Why? Why do we not have a medical examiner in southeastern Oklahoma? When someone dies, they have to lay there until the medical examiner, number one, travels from Tulsa to Idabel, Oklahoma, or wherever, their loved ones may be laying, or it turns into a crime scene to where you have your local or county law enforcement to do the investigation, where you feel like, oh my God, they're treating this like a criminal case, when, it was a natural cause. So I was very angry about that. And I saw what it did in my mom. Oh, my mom. To lose her son, her firstborn, and now her spouse of 51 years. I just broke down and I cried because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I was needed to do to help my mom, except love her, to hover over her. I moved out of my own home. I gave up everything to be with her, to help her get through this. And I just slowly watched her get worse. And we were told, going back 12 years, that she had diverticulitis and a fatty liver. And on top of that, it was grief. The grief of losing her parents, the grief of losing her firstborn, and now the grief of losing her husband. Same hospital, same ER. I took my mom out there, and they just said she had the bug. It was diverticulitis. She has a fatty liver. We went to Texarkana to a GI doctor, and he did a colonoscopy. He said, well, her colon's clean. There's nothing in her colon. And he says, you know, just keep taking what you're taking and follow a strict diet. And he was going along with diverticulitis with a fatty liver. She was getting worse. And when I say worse, she had the tremor of the hand, wheezing. The wheezing sound when she inhale, exhale. It was just constantly wheezing. Watery bowel syndrome. She would throw up. She would get dizzy. She had this red flush, like a hot flash. And I was like, Mom, you shouldn't be having hot flashes at your age. You should be past that stage. I said, there is something else going on. I want you to get a second opinion. I want you to go to Oklahoma City. And she says, Cissy, I've had every test done on me, and they said it's diverticulitis and fatty liver. I'll be fine. And I said, Mom, you're not fine. You're not okay. And if you're not okay, I'm not okay. And I said, it's just driving me crazy not knowing what's wrong with you. My mom was falling down. She was getting confused. My grief. Something big was fixing to hit me. And I was dealing with agony because I was afraid that my mom had cancer. And the reason why she didn't want that second opinion, deep down she knew it too, but she didn't want to face it. After 6 falls, passing out, her being stubborn, my agony caused my blood pressure to go up because, like I said, we have a genetic heart disease in our family with hypertension, and when it goes untreated, it can cause so much damage. I dissected an internal carotid artery next to the circle of the Willis in the base of my brain. Not knowing what was wrong with my mom and the grief, the heartache that I was feeling from the death of my dad that I didn't really have time to grieve for because I was focused on my mom, it affected me physically. So I was full of anger and agony, confused, upset, to the point I dissected my artery. I almost died myself. And that experience is a different story. I don't want to talk about that. But it took me to dissect my artery to get my mom to agree to get a second opinion while we were in Oklahoma City. And when it was my discharge date, which was August 8th, my mom had to go back on August 15th to see another doctor, another specialist. And I was released with home health, and I still had a PICC line in me, and I was still very weak. And so I made arrangements to get my mom to Oklahoma City. She had that doctor's appointment on the 15th, and what was supposed to be, I told you so, from my mother to me, and to where she was going to call me a worrywart, it turned out that I was right. It took 2 weeks of her being admitted in the hospital with 350 tests that cost around $130,000 for them to find out what was wrong with her. She was diagnosed with carcinoid cancer, stage 4 of the liver. And the only thing that the doctor said was that if you're going to have cancer, this is a good kind of cancer to have because it's so slow growing. No cancer's good. And what the doctor didn't tell us is that it didn't start in the liver. That wasn't the primary. He just left it, stage 4 cancer of the liver. And he didn't even tell us that my mom was dying. And if you're not in the medical field, and if you don't get that question answered, you don't know. But I knew when I heard stage 4 that my mom would have 6 months to live, but it was a different kind of cancer that no one knew about. It was so new. And I know one other person that has carcinoid cancer, and she's been living a long time with it. And I thought, well, you know, my mom, I may have her a little bit longer, you know. So my grief, I couldn't focus on it because I had to focus on my mother being a survivor of a cancer that we knew very little about. August to November, she was in and out of the hospital and skill unit in a nursing facility in Oklahoma City. And I was hoping. And my mother, she was putting on a front. She never once complained about hurting. She did everything that she could to prove to my 2 brothers, my 2 living brothers and I, that she was going to beat this. That she was not going to give up, that she was a fighter. And she made it clear that no one can fight this alone and that we need to be positive and encourage her to fight this cancer. So she was ready to come home. And my brothers brought her home. I turned her home kind of like a hospice where she had everything that she needed that she would have in a hospital room or a nursing facility of some sort. She had everything. You name it, she had it in her home. And she did pretty good. I thought she was doing pretty good during the month of November, where we had a wonderful Thanksgiving because she was able to walk and talk, and she had some of her independence. I mean, she was doing better than what most, you know, thought. And then December rolled around. It was a sad Christmas because I saw that my mom was losing the fight with cancer. It was really showing. And as much as my mother was still putting up a front, showing bravery and courage and leaning on faith alone, the hope that I once had was starting to fade, and I got scared. And then I was thinking about my dad and my brother. And I went, Mother, I am so angry. I've been angry at the hospital since 2007, and I've been angry at the fact that we don't have a medical examiner. And now I'm angry because all these years I thought you had diverticulitis and a fatty liver. And you have cancer. Stage 4 cancer of the liver. Where did it come from? How did you get it? She says, I don't know. I've been asking myself that. So for the first time, my mom and I were talking about it. Well, January 27th, 2013, cancer. It won the fight. My mother died. And since then, I have felt abandoned. But I'm not angry anymore. That hospital administrator, he was fired. That happened. Still working on that ER doctor, though. He needs to go. And I hope soon. Who ever heard a gynecologist being a trauma doctor in an ER? Lord. Misdiagnoses are unacceptable. I lost 3 family members. What I feel is abandonment. I feel alone. And nobody knows what that feels like unless they experience what I feel like. Knowing that there's no one to talk to that will understand. You have to go through it. Grief is the unspoken. It's something that we all supposed to experience. Not only once, but many times. And one thing that I learned about grief is that the reason why it hurts so bad, that represents the love that you once felt for that person. And when it really hurts, that person was your heart. And that's why it's not easy to let go and move forward. And when you have bad experiences regarding what happened to your family member, I mean, that's hard to erase. And it gets to the point where you can't think about it, because when you do, everything's just going to build back up again, and you're going to just start crying, and all those feelings are going to resurface again. So what I did, number one, first step, I found the website, Grief The Unspoken, and then I clicked on the closed groups. That's where it really helped me, because I was not only reading other people's stories, but there were people who actually were making videos telling their story and how they're dealing with it. So I like to share how I'm coping and dealing with my loss. First of all, I like to make videos for the whole world to see, express my feelings and my thoughts about whatever it is that's going on with me. I write letters to God. And when I get done writing my letter, I want it to go to heaven. And you don't bury it, so I burn it, and I just throw the burning pages up in the air, and I just watch the wind just takes it. Instead of selling all my parents' and my brother's clothes, I took their t-shirts, sweatshirts, things that was a part of them that they loved, and I turned it into a quilt. And when I start missing them, I just wrap that quilt around me. So Grief The Unspoken is a great support group. I made a big step by joining a local grief support group, which also helps. But I just want everybody to know who are grieving that you're not alone. Jesus is real. Heaven is real. If you don't have a church home, you need to find one. If you want to know who Jesus is, open up the Bible and meet Him. Because I'm going to tell you, there's so much right now I'm not sharing with you because it's too personal. But I am a witness to something that I endure personally, and things that I witnessed regarding 3 family members who died. Heaven is real. The angels are real. God is real. Jesus is real. Just as real as the devil and as hell. And grief is a very dark place that you don't pop pills and cover up with liquor, because all you're going to do is hurt yourself. And the person who loves you is going to be grief-stricken over the loss of you. You got to face this. You got to deal with the raw emotions. And if you're having a bad mom day, dad day, sibling day, grandparent day, or a child day, that's when you have to turn it over to God. And cry if you have to. Rant, vent, do whatever you have to do. But I promise you, I'm going on 7 years without my brother. I'm going on almost 2.5 years without my daddy, and a year without my mom. And I still cry. And look what I'm doing now. I'm making this video, talking to a bunch of strangers. But this is the first time I haven't cried talking about it. Peace out, and God bless. Grief the Unspoken. Wherever you may be, this is morning, afternoon, or night time, you're not alone. See you on the group sessions. The Grief the Unspoken. Thank you, Angie, for finding me.